is record this if you don't mind. And that way I can post it online and you can refer to it because there are some people who are unable to make class. So we'll go with that. Now, are you seeing it or do I need to change screens?
It's screen share at the bottom of the screen.
Okay, let me do something different here, sorry. All right, I'm gonna go to screen share, right, bottom of the machine and find the appropriate one. Yep, there, and I got it. Thank you. I'm gonna get this larger. Let's see how that goes. And got numerous computers talking to me. Sorry about that. All right, so back to the full screen. Yeah, there's a lot here. Growth management, smart growth, sustainable development. These are terms that we use a lot these days, and one sort of piggybacks the other, and frequently are more applicable in newly developed areas than in cities. Most cities are more interested in bringing in new growth because they're declining on the inner city rather than trying to limit it. So it's something that applies mostly for suburban areas. It's strictly interpreted or defined as regulation of the amount, timing, location, and character of development. Now, I have to say that this is exactly what people are worried about here at West Ashley, and this is the big kind of controversy going on. It's usually motivated by environmental concerns, but also quality, to use Grayson's term. That's certainly true. Uses the traditional practice of closely coordinating land use controls and capital and development. Those, of course, as we've talked about before, are the two main ways that cities can influence growth. Once again, presented here, land use controls and capital investment in water and sewer and the rest of it. And the problems, of course, is that it's kind of raising the bridge once you're inside the fort and not letting anybody else in. And so it tends to be exclusionary. So as we look at this, whoops, I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Hello? All right, what did I do wrong? Back to the beginning here. I'd like to take a couple of minutes at the end, like I say, and try to go through some more details. But anyway, state level growth management is one of the areas that's really been brought forward in recent years. The Lincoln Institute, like I say, has been very instrumental in trying to keep that going. State level growth management was a big concern of the Coastal Conservation League for a long time. And now it's, you know, still there, but it's kind of mixed in with a lot of other things. It's not quite the popular term that it once was. Hawaii was the first place that instituted it, you know, a nice little resort. You can actually see, as you look at a Google map of Hawaii, the actual day that they instituted the land use controls, because development was going up the hillsides and it just stopped right there. So it had a terrific, impact there, and in a very delicate ecosystem, as you might imagine Hawaii is, it had a profound effect and much lauded. Florida also, as a very sort of, I won't say pristine, but certainly delicate environmental area, was very strong in state level growth management. And there's that term I mentioned earlier, concurrency. That is where you try to have infrastructure in place for development before the development opens up. And this seems like a really laudable mechanism, but it's kind of hard to manage when you get right down to it. And the city finds itself in a position of not always being able to provide infrastructure, or the developer may not always be able to provide infrastructure and affordable housing at the same time. And so it's looked at a little bit more loosely at this point. Even in Florida, which started this idea of concurrency, it's been problematic because Florida is a real yo-yo state. If you can bear with me on my term real quick, yo-yo meaning that we have both Democratic and Republican governors there going back and forth, and the Republican side takes it back towards the area of private property rights and doesn't enforce the laws that are on the book. And then the Democrat comes in and tries to enforce the laws in the book, and so developers tend to have a little bit of whiplash down there. So the idea of state planning has given us that issue here. Oregon set up state planning, state regulatory planning, and based it on urban growth boundaries. The idea of saying the city cannot grow past a certain point. Even Charleston has set up an urban growth boundary, which we've adjusted a few times, but nevertheless we have. Again, the problem here, just like with any other development control, is that, you know, as that area within the city gets filled up, it actually becomes more expensive. And in Oregon, they've had some pushback against these urban growth boundaries for this very reason. New Jersey has, you know, a kind of a more nuanced way. It uses property tax sharing and uses a more centralized land use control in what they're, you know, doing there. So a number of states, I think about 18 or 19 states, have instituted various levels of state control and are really doing this for trying to improve the environment to the extent that they can. Over time, though, we find that state level or growth level management plans tend to kind of morph and become involved with other issues as well. For example, smart growth. Smart growth is a term we hear a lot. It's the new buzzword. Maryland started it. You know, what we're looking at here, what's to argue with? Smart growth. We want to be smart about how we do it, right? But again, what happens is not always what we intend. Our intent was to do something about sprawl. Sprawl really is, we all know, just for the hell of it, let's repeat it. How would you characterize sprawl?
Sprawls when you just kind of build stuff wherever the most open place is, and then it just keeps growing and it's disorganized without a real community center.
Well, that would be a reasonable kind of talking point. We could also say that it's characterized by single-use development, right? So you have these vast housing estates with no place to shop. So that's one issue. Also, you know, in terms of quality of life, you know, what you're really dealing with is residential more than anything else. So what we're also usually dealing with low density residential. It tends to have, you know, some problems in that respect. Usually its open spaces are not very well defined. You know, usually they even develop within low-lying areas. It's not terribly accessible for people outside the area. Heaven knows you can get lost in some of this old some of these subdivisions that are being developed right now because they're so large. And, you know, it basically encourages strip development for commercial areas. Although in Charleston, we've got the Newtown model, which we're using to try to keep it from looking like strip development, even if it really is. So smart growth here is something that is trying to control sprawl, but, you know, it is problematic in the sense that it doesn't really help the existing communities. It'll help preserve open space and try to keep open space planning as part of these new suburban development, but it really doesn't help within the areas around existing development. Now, I have to just say before I go on, before we go on to sustainability, sorry, just checking. Those of you who've been involved in the past with South Windermere development, I think several of you have, is that not right? Hello? Grayson, I think you were, weren't you?
Yes, sir.
Right. Well, the city, thanks to all of our knocking on the door, right, about this whole development plan, has just put out a request for proposals for engineering firms to, wait for it, work on the drainage in South Windermere. I met with several of the engineers who are working for one of the parties, and they've asked me to join their group, which would be nice because we can get more students involved. But they're very receptive to the ideas for the shopping center and for looking at ways to incorporate the bike trail and all of that, really under the auspices of drainage control. And I think knowing the shopping center and the large parking lot that's there, I think you can see immediately how the two tie together, right? Anyway, I thought that was good news. Talking to Jason about it too, who's with the Coastal Conservation League, if you remember Jason Crowley, and he's pretty excited too. This could represent an opportunity for us to come back in to our existing commercial and residential areas and try to make a difference. So I don't know what we're going to call it. We'll have to come up with a term. But what we're dealing with right now are these suburban approaches to trying to develop smart growth. Maybe we'll talk about this as smarter growth, trying to find an existing area and find a way to make it work better, right? What do you think? Anyway, here we are, smart growth. And then the last of these terms, which you see bantered around a good bit, of course, is sustainability, and we've all talked about that in the past. Meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future generations. And environmental, social, and economic. That's pretty much the idea behind it. And this is what, you know, the college is all about. Maybe you saw an announcement today asking in a survey form, which I would encourage you to participate with, of what the college should be emphasizing next in its sustainability initiatives. So these are things that are fluid and developing as we go along. The whole issue of sustainability has been around since, I guess, the UN passed it in 1986, I think, maybe 88, somewhere around there anyway, that basically set this whole idea up. Now, one of the immediate, notice that it involves environmental, social, and economic. One of the immediate kind of concerns is that by insisting on social equity, you know, something that actually even in our own country, we really don't push forward that much. We tend to think of sustainable in terms of light bulbs and that sort of thing, rather than trying to promote a concern about people's welfare. Although Todd is trying to do as much as he can to change that. But we have this issue of rising expectations associated with it, particularly in the Middle East. The what was it called? The Arab Spring jumped out mostly because of these rising expectations people have of improving their lives. And in many cases, they were literally not sustainable and have reverted to something even worse than what was there before. It's an interesting idea. It's a useful concept for a variety of scales. One of the things that, you know, we talk about it and trying to keep a larger view is trying to understand not only the dynamics of the economy and the city's economy, but also the environment, and then therefore the society, but those two things primarily. And what gets argued, particularly in the city of Charleston of late, is that we need greater density in order to keep the cost per person or per capita down. It makes sense that if you put more people in a building, that it costs less per person for the roads and infrastructure and everything that services them. That kind of stands, you know, on prima facie of it just as true. However, when you look at the environmental effects, there is such a thing as, how shall I say, natural kind of stop there. That's not the right word, I'm sorry. But we're limited by our environment, by how much the environment can absorb, not only in terms of the environment in the marsh and the amount of sewage we can, you know, treat and put out there, but also the school systems, for example. We have to be very concerned about, the word I was looking for was carrying capacity. I knew it would come to me. So we have on the one hand, per capita loading. We want to increase density in order to try to keep the cost down for the people there and hopefully also keep it affordable. On the other hand, we have the notion that somehow or other we are limited by our technologies as to just how much we can have in density. So these are the two kind of competing factors there. It's basically, I think, yeah, this is a good point about the big difference in sustainability as a model is that we're looking at it really as a long-term idea and trying to wrap all different kinds of aspects of the community together, environmental, social, economic. We've talked before about how in Charleston, we are considering the environment as being absolutely essential and the economic and the social being really nested within that, not the usual model that you see, which is this, right? The sort of intersection, the happy medium between all of these is called sustainable. There are issues with this, I must say. When you start thinking about, you know, if we don't have the right kind of environment, then nothing else makes sense. So here we are now in this current age with the smart growth tactics that have usually been used in suburban areas, trying to think about how we can make a difference within existing areas. And this is what I was talking about before with South Windermere. We have the opportunity to try to come in and take existing development and make it more sustainable, make it greener, make it affordable, etc. And so Ellen Dunham Jones is on the list of one of our readers, our reading material, as this book called Retrofitting Suburbia, which you might find interesting. It's also available online. She teaches at Georgia Tech and has been working very hard in the Atlanta area in trying to do just this. And so you find illustrations here where you take an existing urban area and you're promoting various kinds of uses that work towards a more sustainable model on all levels. You notice she's got a light rail station planned here, infill housing in here that will make for more affordable housing, a place for day laborers, community, hello, what am I doing? What did it do? Sorry. Community gardens, research and development, renewable energy, processing food, all kinds of things, trying to get the existing development to be more compatible with the idea of sustainable development. And she also shows charts of how it can happen, how we can retrofit existing areas to make them greener. The housing transformation in the upper row shows essentially a typical kind of golf course development that gets transformed into multi-use and green space. The golf course infill, a different kind of golf course. The top one would be more like a links. The bottom one would be more like a regular golf course, and converting that into some kind of residential development. I would point out at this particular point that, you know, although golf courses seems like kind of, you know, an abstract idea, I mean, Myrtle Beach has more golf courses per capita than any place on the planet, and most of them are unsustainable. So this is an issue that can actually be important to South Carolina. And then here's a typical shopping center and how we might be able to develop that into more like a gridded block pattern. You've seen some of this being developed for the Citadel Mall as part of the West Ashley planning process we've talked about before. So that's the last of these slides. What I'm going to do is go back to the screen share, or try to, meeting controls. And where are we? Excuse me. And minimize this so we can get back to something else. Hello. And stop share for a minute. Right, we're back together. So that's the ideas of growth management that played out in recent history. And this is what the textbook covers. We have some new ideas that we're working with now. In any case, what we're doing is trying to blend the idea of growth management with other kinds of municipal functions that are already in place, or even some new ones that are there. Anybody have any questions about that information that I just tried to convey? Does it seem pretty straightforward? Grayson, is it too repetitive of the textbook?
No, but my mom is out here and she was listening and she just asked, maybe you can answer. She was asking what you were saying about the Citadel Mall. Would you consider Town Center to be a good example of mixed use?
All right, there are a couple of town centers. Which town center are you referring to?
One Mount Pleasant, where it's got everything from the movie theater to now they're starting to have some more housing and a variety of different stuff, but then they've also got a little bit of green space too.
Certainly that is the attempt of the planners in Mount Pleasant to do that, given the existing kind of development framework that they have to deal with. If you're asking me if it's entirely successful, I think that, you know, you would have to look at some of the aspects as being not entirely successful. The housing is not altogether affordable, as I understand it. And it's not exactly mixed use. You've got still separation between commercial areas and housing areas. So you really don't have a city per se. You have kind of a really nice suburban development where you do have walkability, but you don't exactly have the same convenience you would have in a city. Is that fair to say?
She liked what you said.
Okay. You know, it's hard. I mean, these things take time. And one of the things that I respect, and maybe we haven't managed to do, is to try to find an urban sort of model that allows for, how shall I say, development over time. The way, you know, Town Center has been planned mostly on a corporate level where, you know, you have a big group of folks with investment money come in and develop big hunks of it. that at its core tends to look more corporate rather than more sort of individualistic and interesting as you would find in a city. So, I don't know whether there's a real good answer to that, but we are trying a couple of different ideas. What I'm going to do is go through some of the videos, with apologies, that are on the Oaks page, and maybe it'll give us some new ideas for the future. Let's see, I'm going to go back to this one, I think, and I'm going to try to reshare the screen. Where am I? There. I want to share the screen again. Sorry, this is a bit cumbersome, but hopefully it'll be all right. We'll go there, share it. So here we have, this is where the last half of the lecture came in today. Let's start with the Atlanta Regional Commission. So what we're dealing with, I think, in terms of growth control, is trying to find a broader context for it, not just in suburban, as well as trying to find a way to finally address the issue of affordable housing, which seems to be something eluding all of us right now. But let's start with the Atlanta Regional Commission on a regional level. This has got a video that plays out back down into it. There's a lot of interesting things here. Anyway, so, and I'm the last person that would want to come to the defense of Atlanta. I left Atlanta to come to Charleston. I did not want to stay around Atlanta. When I left school, it was like sprawl everywhere, interstates everywhere. They had a sign on the interstate that advertised their population growth. I mean, it was just like Ivan Allen was the mayor at the time. It was just really hard to take, if you know what I mean. They have, kind of cleaned up their act a little bit, and they have some really interesting parts to the city. Now, when I go back, I find that there's a lot that we can do there, and it's worthwhile, although I hate the interstate still, if you know what I mean. And some of the areas, the outlying areas, are really a problem still. But anyway, let's take a look at the Atlanta Regional Commission and what they're all about.
The world is changing fast. It's more complex and connected than ever before. The only certainty, it seems, is change. Here in Metro Atlanta, our population is booming and growing more diverse. We're living longer, too. The Atlanta Regional Commission is charged with peering into the future and working with our partners across the community to plan for a better, brighter tomorrow. We all want better ways of getting
Hello? Sorry.
From point A to point B. ARC coordinates with local governments and transportation agencies to improve mobility options across the region. We collaborate with local communities to make the Atlanta region an even better place to live. A great community is one that works for everyone, regardless of age or ability. ARC coordinates a range of services to help older persons and people with disabilities thrive. A clean, abundant water supply is vital to our region's future. ARC manages the Metropolitan North Georgia Water Planning District, which works to conserve and protect our water resources. A strong economy is essential to our region's future success. ARC manages WorkSource Atlanta Regional, which provides services to meet the needs of today's employers and job seekers. Informed leaders serve as catalysts to move the region forward. Our leadership programs help decision makers think regionally and transform challenges into opportunities. Rapid change drives the need for more and better information. We analyze data to provide insights that help leaders move our region forward. ARC serves as a regional convener, bringing people together to facilitate the critical conversations needed to address our key challenges. We coordinate with local first responders to prepare for a secure region by administering the Atlanta Urban Area Security Initiative, a program of the Department of Homeland Security. Our innovative What's Next ATL program engages the community through a website, podcast, and speaker series to help identify and tackle critical regional issues. All of our work is guided by the leadership of our 39-member board of elected and citizen members. The Atlanta region is a special place where 21st century innovation blends effortlessly with small-town charm, where businesses soar and a vibrant creative community inspires us all. But great communities don't happen by accident. It takes careful planning, smart investments, and forward-looking decisions. The Atlanta Regional Commission, working every day to improve quality of life for all of Metro Atlanta.
So a couple of things. Let me see, I'll go back to screen share. We're back. So the Atlanta Regional Commission was originally set up just to handle water, because water was such a big issue in Atlanta, was actually impeding its ability to grow. And so, you know, the Chattahoochee River was considered to be inadequate for the Atlanta area, and Atlanta was taking all the water. And the surrounding states, Alabama and Florida, were being cut back on the amount of water they needed. Places like Apalachicola Bay and the Panhandle was not getting enough flow of water to keep their oyster business thriving, for example. And the other municipalities felt cut out of it too. So they've been involved in a 30-year-long or longer lawsuit trying to control the water. Atlanta Regional Commission was set up to try to manage that. And it really got its legs doing that, and has done an amazing job to try to work towards multiple goals like fisheries, like farms, like other communities, as well as Atlanta, to try to get this done on a very much larger scale. Now, we look at sustainable development in this context, it really starts to make sense. One of the issues with the early growth management schemes or ideas is that it tended to kind of be involved just in a smaller area, not a regional area. And so consequently, decisions made in that smaller area about the amount of housing or the amount of business had a direct impact on the other areas. So it tended to set up sort of a competitive framework for trying to get things done. And so, you know, for example, you know, if Charleston were suddenly decide that, you know, we're going to have no new housing developed here, that's going to have an impact on the amount of housing that gets developed in Mount Pleasant, or any other restriction we place on it. It's just going to move over and affect the area right next to us. So to the extent that we can create this framework, this sustainable framework for a larger area, then we can control this much more effectively. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah? Cool. Well, there's a question in there. So let's, I like the Atlanta Regional Commission. It's done great work. It's got, you know, real practical bend to it. Like I said, it started in dealing with water and has been moving on from there. Dealing with environmental issues, has been moving on to quality of life issues. So it's really important from that respect. Now what I'm going to do is show you a couple of these other ones. I'm going to have to share screen again. You see this one, go back to, I'm sorry, I'm going back to here and going here. So much fun. All right, now going back to sharing screen, and what we'll do is we'll look at some initiatives that we're trying here in Charleston based on our own, you know, concerns that reflect a little bit on a different kind of approach to planning. That was the regional, Atlanta Regional Commission. I'm skipping over doing the math on new development right now. That's about an hour-long talk that deals primarily with economics. You familiar, we've done some discussions before about strong towns, correct? You remember that? You with it? Hello? You guys with me?
Yes.
Okay, just checking. I feel crazy talking to myself in this room, you know? It's like I kind of miss seeing everybody, but whatever. Anyway, I'll put everybody back up again. We'll see that way. Maybe that'll help me. But they're doing the math on new development and talking about just how much new development costs and who has to pay for it. And those of you who are really interested in the economic model, I would urge you to take a look at that. You might find it very interesting. But what I want to talk a little bit about is the Community Land Trust, CLT, as a mechanism that tries to build community and affordable housing. So this could be part of a larger scheme, and we've actually talked about Community Land Trust in the class before. You remember that? Sort of?
Yeah, basically what they're doing on Johns Island.
Well, Community Land Trust right now is happening West Ashley and Maryville, right?
Well, wouldn't it be a community land trust with the whole areas that are putting the conservation easements on their property because they're doing it as a community, not, or is it just a bunch of individual people putting?
Community land trust can be whatever the community wants to hold in trust, okay? So for example, some of the oldest land trusts, community land trusts out there up in Delaware. And up there, that was started in the end of the 19th century. And Arden is one of the places. And there they were concerned at the time with trying to promote the arts and crafts, trying to promote, self-sufficiency, that sort of thing as being the heart of democracy. And so you go there now and they have a craftsman guild that's still popular. They have a venue for playing Shakespeare in the park as part of the common area. And so their emphasis was placed differently. Our emphasis right now is on affordable housing. You could put your emphasis on whatever you want and just get people to work together on it. Does that make sense? I'm having some microphone issues here. Okay, there we are, I think. Anyway, so the issue for us is trying to figure out what you want to do. And here in Charleston, affordable housing, particularly for the African-American community, is considered to be very important. So what I'd like to do is go to this link and share it. Can you guys see the link? The Community Land Trust, a win-win. Do you see that? Hello?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great, thanks. Just checking. This is from Minnesota, but it also applies in South Carolina too.
It's awesome. I'm serious. When we got into the land trust, we were shocked to find out that we could afford this and this was going to be our house. I walked into everything knowing exactly what I was going for, and I got everything that I got more than I could have ever imagined out of this place. The affordability was really the big piece for me.
We were walking into a new house. We never had such a nice house. New windows, new roof, new mechanics, remodeled a lot of the rooms. That was really what sold us on the house.
One of the primary missions of the Community Land Trust is to help a family right now get into a home affordably, but also to ensure that that home remains affordable for the future, for the next family and the family after that.
We're always looking at the longest lifespan of our materials and our resources to make sure that our financial investment is as long-term as possible. So it's not only an affordable house at purchase, it's an affordable house throughout the lifetime.
I like the fact that in buying my home, I would be investing in the future for other people to live in that same house. It would always be affordable. There are no losses. It's win-win.
I hear that a lot of people are real suspicious about the land trust and just how all that works and just wondering if it's a gimmick. And it just isn't.
It's just like a normal anybody's house. It's not as if it's different. Our neighbors don't even know that we're in the land trust unless we tell them. Even today, I still drive up to the house. It's been almost 10 years now, and I still go, I'm not kidding. It's just cool.
We kind of have a feeling that we're supported. It's been the best option that's ever happened to us, and I've seen nothing but positive things come from the people that I've met.
I would want people to know that if they're interested, they should check it out.
You're going to get a good home. You're going to get good support. When you go to resell your house, they're there to help you. The house is perfect. It's given us a lot more freedom in our life.
House is perfect. What's not to like, right? So there's another video there which deals with the history of land trust in particular, which is kind of interesting. But the idea is that the land is held in common with all members of the community, and you own the house that's on it, right? And anything you do to the house, you get the benefit of, but you don't get the benefit of increased value of the property. What does that do? Well, essentially what that does is helps to take the land speculator out of it, right? If you look at your tax bill on your house, 2/3 to 3/4 of it is the value of your property, not of your house, which is kind of interesting. And you see what happens is that the value of that property, the real estate, the royal estate, is something that, you know, you are not in control of. The only thing you can control is the value of your property or the house that you put on it. So it's taking the property out of the mix, making it more difficult to land speculate. Now, in South Carolina, the law is written so that there is like a board of directors composed of 1/3 of the local planners or city people, 1/3 of the residents, and 1/3 of an eleemosynary group like the Historic Charleston Foundation, I think it is, has the Palmetto Land Trust that they're using to set it up. And so you have an assortment across the community that makes decisions together about how their property is used. Now, in Maryville, they've just built 7 affordable housing units, really nice ones, and are starting to build more, in fact, in that area. You know, the question really is, at this point in looking at it, is it going to do a good job of keeping people in their homes? Or is it simply just another way to gentrify a neighborhood by fixing up houses and driving up the value of what's left? That's a real question. Because to some extent in Maryville, we may have waited a little bit too late to institute this policy because the land values are already starting to rise. The secret to this is to get in there first and do the acquisition of property before the value starts to rise, and then the whole idea of doing land trusts becomes problematic. For example, you wouldn't be able to do a land trust in the city of Charleston right now because the land's too expensive, right? So this is a way that's on a small scale that we try to make improvements in a kind of existing development level of planning. So what I guess I'm doing is trying to counterweight this growth management planning discussion with stuff that we need to do on a regional level to improve the sustainability and on a local level to improve specific ideas that we're trying to incorporate within our communities. Affordable housing being one that people are really concerned about right now. Make sense? Kind of? Sort of? So what are big questions that come from this? Do you see Charleston being able to actively become involved in some kind of regional approach? We have one, it's called the Council of Governments, right? What did the Dutch say about developing a regional approach to drainage? Does anybody recall, having looked at the Dutch dialogues, what it says? Elsie, you were in some of these courses. Remember how they wanted to develop a czar to create a regional governance to make decisions across various municipalities?
Yeah.
So they're looking at a regional approach even within just dealing with drainage. In fact, we used to have a water district that incorporated all of the coastal areas called the Coastal Council, the South Carolina Coastal Council. It was done away with a number of years ago and incorporated all within DHEC. Of course, DHEC is undermanned and under-resourced and not able to do its job. But this is something now we're actually coming back with again and saying we need to do it. We need to incorporate all the areas that are affected by drainage and make decisions on that basis. So anyway, regional planning is going to be coming up a little bit later, but nevertheless, it speaks to the issue of growth management effectively because many of the problems and the schemes that have come up with haven't dealt comprehensively enough with the problem and maybe have created their own problems. This is why state level planning was considered important, but has also been extremely unpopular. So maybe it's because we need to break up these planning districts into districts that make more sense economically, socially, environmentally, right? And so if we do that, then we have fewer conflicts between inherent differences in these regions. And to some extent, we have the low country, the Midlands, and the upcountry to kind of, speak to that. And so this is kind of the structure that's being proposed here. When we start talking about controlling growth, we need to be both more regional, more comprehensive, and do things that make sense on an individual level. Anyway, that's me. Thoughts, guys?
Well, at least because in the book, chapter 16, they were talking about Minneapolis and St. Paul's and how they kind of had to make a regional plan because otherwise they would just be kind of going at each other's throats all the time, which I think here, because we have so many different municipalities, but everybody's kind of functioning in the same general sphere, and we're getting so close to cities like, or towns like Somerville and Mount Pleasant that we kind of have to all work together. Otherwise, it's just kind of chaotic.
Well, we have over 60 different municipal and area governances in the Tri-County area. That's pretty amazing, right? And one of the things that we found out the hard way, that it makes sense to do this kind of thing. A number of years ago, they were trying to figure out where to put the Hunley. And we had Mount Pleasant, City of Charleston, City of North Charleston, all competing for the Hunley. And, the result was that, it was being placed in an area that really, maybe was the most affordable, but certainly was not the most accessible. And so, we could argue these things a number of ways, but certainly having a larger sort of regional structure makes a lot of sense and is somewhat difficult. People have to give up their differences, but we're being pushed into it. It's necessary in order to compete with these other areas like we were looking at in Atlanta or Minneapolis, for sure. All right, so a big question that comes out of this is, in looking at this issue, how do you see it morphing from a local issue to a regional issue? And we need to talk about it in terms of specific programs. So we can say that it started off local and it had a kind of a mixed result, mostly in keeping, how shall I say, trying to maintain environmental control, but at the same time causing other problems with affordable housing, et cetera. And so we moved to a more comprehensive approach in order to come up with a more sustainable solution. So here we are, we're basically looking at sort of a timeline of the attempts to deal with this. Now we call it sustainable. And I think that's probably a good place to be, although we have to be mindful of the fact that it's a long-term enterprise and one that it's really hard to mark your success because we're interested in everything, right? It's a lot easier to be successful if you limit your criteria. So anyway, everybody doing okay? How about your research papers? Any thoughts on that? Well, let's get together again on Wednesday, and I'm recording this, so I'll post it online. We'll do another, 30, 45-minute session dealing with the next chapter. Like I say, I'm trying to stay on this and take a look at your papers. Now's the time to start doing that and asking questions, okay?
Okay.
Thank you, guys. Don't want to keep you too long. I appreciate your coming today, and we'll talk again very soon. I'm available via email, whatever, to get together. We can even do an individual Zoom session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it. Appreciate it.